Our sun, just one of billions of stars in our galaxy, just one of billions of galaxies in the universe. Are we really alone?
Estimate of the situation. Before the summer of 1947, the idea of otherworldly beings and their incursions into the Earth's airspace was the subject matter of speculative astronomers and scientific fiction writers. The subject had been explored on film as well as in literature. The subject had been examined by government agencies and think tank organizations. Although the public at large were occupied with the business of day-to-day living, sightings of anomalous aerial phenomena had been made for years.
April of 1897, when a glowing red dirigible-shaped object indicated that it was about to touch down in a cattle lot on the farm of Alexander Hamilton near Leroy, Kansas, Hamilton and his teenage son and his hired man armed themselves with axes and rushed toward the craft. It quickly rose into the air out of reach, taking with it the hideous creatures which the men reportedly saw in the brightly lighted cabin beneath the craft. In January of 1910, the city of Chattanooga, Tennessee was surprised by the visit of a large dirigible-shaped craft which cruised about over the city in broad daylight for about half an hour, in full view of thousands of people, many of whom were admittedly frightened by it. In those days, the only similar devices known to man were a few clumsy, underpowered zeppelins in Europe, totally incapable of visiting this country. Next day, the object was back over Chattanooga, and then it rose into the clouds and moved away toward the south. Another well-attested enigma in the long, long story of the unidentified flying objects.
Legendary British Secret Service operative R.V. Jones investigated the World War II mystery, Foo Fighters. Strange balls of light that appeared to follow our planes, occasionally interfering with flight instruments, but never engaging pilots in combat. After the war, Jones was invited to Sweden to help with the investigation of ghost rockets. The theory that the Soviet Union had developed German rocket technology was quickly ruled out. The ghost rockets, like the Foo Fighters before them, were never explained, and soon became another, ill-remembered quirk of history. Possibly the most astonishing lapse in recorded history is the ongoing mystery of transient lunar phenomena. Ever since astronomers had been training telescopes on the moon, they've been reporting strange changes on the surface, bright flashes of light, sometimes in rhythmic sequences. Several highly respected astronomers from across the globe watched the crater Lynn slowly fade away over a period of weeks.
In 1964, our Ranger 7 sent back thousands of pictures before it crashed into the moon. Ranger 8 did even better, both in quantity and quality. But very few pictures from that second group were ever exposed to public gaze. And those pictures should have been very interesting, for they were centered on that area around the crater Aristarchus, where so many phenomena have been noted, and where the phenomena are still being noted, for that matter. The story of man's interest in lunar phenomena was dramatically intensified by a series of events which may not have been related. And then again, perhaps they were. Here is that story. Dr. Asaph Hall discovered in one 6-day period in 1877 that the planet Mars had 2 moons, where no moons had ever been seen before. Moreover, the moons of Mars were brighter than the planet itself, as though they were of different material. And one of the moons revolves around the planet in an orbit unlike any other natural satellite, if that's what it is. 2 years after Dr. Hall's historic discoveries, the British Astronomical Society was deluged with reports of strange lights on the moon in the dark part of the lunar orb. So many astronomers reported so many anomalies that the Society began to wonder if there was somebody up there and if they were trying to make us aware of their presence by arranging lights in geometric patterns. The Society requested that its members chart and report any and all such oddities on the moon in the hope that some sort of intelligible signals might be discovered. Well, they got a lot more than they bargained for. Between 1879 and 1882, the Astronomical Society received more than 2,000 reports of light patterns on the dark part of the moon. They received so many reports that they had to ask their members to refrain from making any additional reports. The society was unable to cope with what it already had. In the summer of 1965, moon watching had become fashionable once more for professional astronomers. They began to notice occasional flashes of intensely bright white light from the floor of the crater Aristarchus. Several observatories were linked by shortwave radio stations, so that the instant any one of them saw this curious light, the other observatories were notified. This project was called Astronet, and it recorded those flashes many times in the year 1965, and as a result, the number of observatories involved was increased in 1966, and also the results. Still another oddity known to exist on the moon is that of the objects called moon domes. These are circular white hemispherical spots which are at just about the limit of telescopic visibility. They're probably 600 feet in diameter. It was once thought that these things were hills, or perhaps tiny volcanic cones, but subsequent study revealed that the mysterious domes sometimes vanished in one area and appeared later in another. What they were and why they seemed to be hopscotching around on the bleak lunar surface, no man can say. One of the most baffling lunar anomalies was the gigantic bridge-like structure first reported in the early 1950s by John O'Neill, who described the thing as looking like an enormous bridge with a span at least 12 miles long. O'Neill, who was then the respected science editor of the New York Herald Tribune, received the scornful response he had expected, but it dissipated rapidly when famed British selenologist Dr. H. Percy Wilkins reported seeing the same thing just 1 month after O'Neill's discovery. Shortly afterward, the bridge, or whatever it was, vanished from the Merecrisium, or at least it vanished from the sight of man.
Efforts to play down the mysteries of space in the minds of the public have been resisted by the entertainment industry. The hunger for space and alien contact remains unabated. H.G. Wells' seminal alien invasion story has captured the imagination of generation after generation, causing panic when Orson Welles adapted it for radio as a mock news report.
Nikola Tesla sent out tremendously powerful radio signals in 1899, signals that were little more than man-made lightning bolts delivered in measured sequence. They could be picked up at great distance from the Earth, if anybody was listening. Marconi picked up strange signals from space exactly 22 years later. The origin of those signals was and is unknown. But the really interesting factor here is that 22-year sequence between powerful man-made signals and signals from outer space. In 1924, when the planet Mars came within 35 million miles of the Earth, the United States Navy hired scientists to record radio signals on photographic paper which moved through a special machine. The antennas were turned toward Mars. Signals came in. When the sensitized paper was developed, it showed unintelligible strings of dots and dashes, but it also showed clumps of signals which resembled crude caricatures of human faces. There was no explanation then, and there is none now. That was in 1924. 22 years later, the UFOs swarmed over northwestern Europe and began their systematic surveillance of man and his works. And more radio signals kept trickling in, fragmentary signals, and 22 years old when we got them back from somewhere. In more recent years, many countries have built huge radio telescopes. Those telescopes, and especially those at Green Bank, West Virginia, have devoted and are devoting a great deal of time and scientific manpower to the study of two particular stars, Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani. Some of the incoming signals were so startling and perhaps so important that a special secret meeting of experts in this field was held to discuss the findings, whatever they were. Why all this special attention to those two stars, Tau Ceti and Epsilon Eridani? Could it be due to the fact that they are exactly 11 light years away, which means that a transmitter in that area might be returning our signals 22 years late? If we are being signaled and visited by sentient beings from space, what kind of creatures are they? All the credible witnesses, including a veteran police officer of fine repute in Socorro, New Mexico, describe the creatures as small, man-like fellows, less than 4 feet tall, wearing shiny spacesuits and transparent helmets, much like our own spacemen in miniature. Where do they come from? Nobody knows yet. Why don't they contact us? Well, we have shot at them with cannon, rifles, pistols, shotguns, and guided missiles. They may regard this action on our part as unfriendly. When will they contact us, if ever? The fact that they are still with us after all these years probably means that they intend an eventual contact. A study of their past performance indicates that we are in the closing phases of a long and careful surveillance. At this pace, contact may occur in the next 2 or 3 years, or it could come tomorrow. The more we study the evidence that is being assembled all over the earth, the more inescapable the conclusion that man had best prepare himself for the greatest event in human history, the realization that we are about to contact or to be contacted by sentient beings from elsewhere in the universe. The late General Douglas MacArthur said that this confrontation would be the greatest challenge man ever had to face. Are we ready for it when and if it comes? Frank Edwards reporting.